Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, California's criminal landscape teemed with violent predators who captured headlines and terrorized communities. Yet among these dangerous individuals, one perpetrator nearly vanished from public consciousness, despite leaving behind a trail of victims across the East Bay region. For nearly 10 years, Charles Jackson Jr. moved through residential neighborhoods, forcing entry into homes, sexually assaulting women, and taking lives before disappearing into darkness. His attacks followed no discernible pattern, arriving without warning and executed with brutal efficiency. Investigators would eventually identify him through a moniker that few recall today: the East Bay Slayer. The complete scope of his criminal activities proved far more extensive than initial investigations revealed. Charles Jackson Jr. entered the world in Louisiana during February 1937, but circumstances preventing an ordinary upbringing began immediately. His family existed in crushing poverty, the variety that extends beyond material deprivation to rob children of developmental opportunities. The family soon relocated to Mississippi, where the trajectory of his life took increasingly troubling turns. Accounts from relatives, though often reluctantly shared, paint a picture of early years marked by domestic volatility. His father's explosive temperament transformed routine family interactions into unpredictable confrontations. Young Charles developed into a withdrawn, observant child whose outward quietness masked developing pathologies. By adolescence, Jackson had accumulated his first encounters with law enforcement. His offenses, theft, residential burglaries, and assaults, suggested more than poverty-driven opportunism. They revealed an undercurrent of anger. Particularly concerning were early charges involving sexual violations, crimes demonstrating calculated cruelty and predatory targeting. Nevertheless, he slipped through gaps in the juvenile justice system. During the late 1950s, he followed his mother westward to California. Though this relocation might have represented a fresh beginning, psychological baggage accompanied the geographic change. He found irregular employment as a handyman, drifting between jobs and maintaining a low profile. Neighbors perceived him as unusual, but generally unthreatening. However, nighttime frequently found Jackson absent for extended periods, returning without explanation. Across 2 decades, authorities arrested him repeatedly on charges including burglary, rape, assault, and offenses against minors. The year 1975 marked the beginning of a series of murders. Sonia Higginbotham, 19 years old and pursuing her education, became the first confirmed victim. She lived independently, occupying a modest Oakland apartment in a neighborhood where residents maintained privacy, while remaining sufficiently active that violent incidents might go unnoticed. Mid-June arrived when her landlord observed accumulated mail and darkened windows. Using his master key for a welfare check, he encountered an overwhelming odor upon opening the door, metallic, decaying, and profoundly disturbing. Investigators discovered Sonia's body in the bedroom. Her nightgown showed signs of violent removal, bunched around her midsection. Evidence indicated sexual assault, followed by multiple stab wounds, more than a dozen deep penetrations concentrated around her torso and neck area. Several wounds struck with sufficient force to impact bone. Remarkably, the apartment showed no forced entry indicators. Windows remained intact, and the interior maintained unusual tidiness. Forensic examination yielded no foreign fingerprints. No biological material appeared beneath her fingernails. No hair samples, no fiber evidence. The perpetrator had departed without leaving conventional traces. Medical examination determined that death, while relatively rapid, was not instantaneous. Initial wounds compromised her lung function. She possessed the physical capacity to vocalize distress, yet no witnesses reported hearing anything unusual. Alternatively, if sounds were heard, no one responded. 2 months elapsed before another attack occurred. August heat intensified atmospheric tension throughout the region. One morning in Montclair, a concerned co-worker contacted police after 27-year-old Ann Johnson failed to appear for her shift or telephone with an explanation, behavior inconsistent with her character. Ann worked as a scheduler for a medical clinic known for meticulous organization and reliability. Friends described her personality as pleasant but reserved, with interests including reading and cultivating houseplants. Her residence was an attractive bungalow surrounded by oak trees and enclosed by decorative fencing. a location that projected safety until circumstances proved otherwise. Responding officers found the front entrance slightly ajar. No evidence of forced entry presented itself. The living area appeared undisturbed. However, the hallway revealed a different situation. Blood droplets formed a disturbing trail leading toward the bedroom. Anne's body lay across her bed unclothed. Bruising on her wrists suggested restraint. Duct tape covered her mouth, one piece partially removed indicating attempted vocalization. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed, the wounds demonstrating greater precision than those inflicted on the previous victim. Abdominal slashes, a deep puncture penetrating her clavicle and a wound to her eye. Evidence suggested the perpetrator remained at the scene after death. A drinking vessel in the sink bore lipstick marks and her fingerprints, while a nearby plate contained crumbs. This suggested the killer may have consumed food while watching his victim expire. Despite these details, nothing definitively connected this scene to the earlier homicide. DNA analysis technology did not yet exist in the 1970s. Usable fingerprint evidence remained absent. Only growing dread and investigative silence persisted. A period of apparent inactivity followed until 1978. One warm Saturday in Moraga, a suburban community nestled among rolling terrain, 11-year-old Cynthia Waxman played in a grassy field near Buckingham Drive with her cousin. They had discovered a stray kitten and were feeding it sandwich portions wrapped in a napkin. The cousin briefly departed to obtain money for proper cat food from a nearby store. Upon returning, Cynthia had disappeared. Initial assumptions suggested she might have wandered away, but as minutes accumulated into tens of minutes, alarm intensified. Within hours, the Waxman family initiated a comprehensive search operation. Local law enforcement deployed tracking canines and helicopters. Volunteer searchers dispersed across the area. The field underwent systematic examination. Surrounding wooded areas received thorough investigation. Discovery occurred just before sunset. Her body had been concealed in dense brush, merely 20 yards from her last confirmed location. She was partially unclothed from the waist down. Her throat had been slashed with such severity that near decapitation resulted. Defensive wounds marked her hands, indicating she fought her attacker despite the strength differential. Evidence suggested sexual assault preceded death. And particularly disturbing detail involved twigs forcibly inserted into her mouth, likely after death. No fingerprints, tire tracks, or witness observations emerged. Her disappearance and return seemed almost supernatural in its inexplicability. This incident deeply traumatized the community. Cynthia had recently joined the Girl Scouts, and her backpack, discovered nearby, still contained her badge handbook. Police attempted to calm public anxiety, but fundamental questions proliferated. Was a single perpetrator responsible? Why had years elapsed between attacks? Why target a child? The characteristic that defined Charles Jackson Jr. involved his lack of predictable patterns. He did not kill according to schedules. He was not a creature driven by ritualistic compulsion. Rather, he functioned as an adaptive predator, patient, opportunistic, and versatile. Victim age, marital status, or living situation proved irrelevant to his selection process. If circumstances presented an opportunity, he capitalized on it. The investigative challenges were mounting. 3 years later, in 1981, the killings resumed. November 22nd brought the discovery of Henry Villa and his wife Edith murdered in their Albany Hill residence. The attack occurred as they prepared for sleep. The killer had gained access through the rear entrance. The downstairs area showed no struggle indicators. Henry's body was discovered first, collapsed near the hallway, bearing multiple stab wounds. Edith was found in the bedroom, the bedding saturated with blood. She had been sexually assaulted before receiving fatal stab wounds to her chest and neck. The scene possessed an eerie quietness, suggesting the perpetrator may have lingered in darkness following the murders. December 4th, 1981 brought another victim. Betty Jo Grunswag, 37 years old and a mother, was discovered in her Moraga home. She had been strangled and sexually assaulted. Her young daughter, who had been present during the attack, survived by hiding. The child's testimony provided investigators with limited useful information, as she had remained concealed and traumatized throughout the incident. January 1982, marked the attack that would eventually lead to Jackson's conviction for a single murder. Joan Stewart, a biology professor at San Francisco City College, was assaulted while returning home from grocery shopping in Oakland's Montclair neighborhood. Her husband, also an educator at the college, discovered her body down an embankment less than a mile from their residence after noticing her purse, produce items and umbrella scattered along the roadway. Witness testimony placed Jackson near the crime scene, providing crucial evidence for prosecution. The investigative breakthrough arrived years later through advancing forensic technology. In 1998, law enforcement agencies initiated DNA testing on unsolved cases dating from the early 1990s back through the 1970s throughout the East Bay area. Progress materialized in 1999 when Charles Jackson's DNA profile matched biological evidence recovered from the 1981 double homicide of Henry and Edith Vila. When investigators informed Jackson that his DNA conclusively linked him to the crime scene, he refused to exit his cell at Folsom State Prison or communicate with detectives. Investigators chose not to pursue charges for additional murders at that time, prioritizing focus on the current case. However, on February 15, 2002, Charles Jackson died from cardiac arrest in his prison cell at age 65. His death did not halt the investigation. By 2005, continued DNA analysis revealed Jackson's involvement in additional murders, the killings of Higginbotham, Johnson, Waxman, Grunsweig, and others. Jackson's actual victim count remains undetermined, complicated by the fact that at least 6 other serial killers operated in the Contra Costa County area during his active period. The East Bay Slayer's complete criminal legacy may never be fully established, but the verified scope of his violence confirms him as one of California's most prolific predators during an era already marked by multiple serial criminals. In the forested highlands of central Slovakia, a region known as Horechroni, a crime occurred in late October 1987 that would permanently mark the final chapter of capital punishment in Czechoslovakia. Štefan Svitek, a 27-year-old man with an extensive criminal history, committed an act of such profound brutality against his own family that even experienced forensic professionals struggled to maintain composure at the scene. This case represents not merely a criminal investigation, but a psychological examination of how childhood trauma, substance abuse, and untreated mental pathology can converge into catastrophic violence. Štefan Svitek was born January 23, 1960, in Podbrezova, a rural community in the Brezno district. He was one of 5 siblings raised in a forested, isolated area. His mother died when he reached 18 years of age. His father was a violent alcoholic whose aggression terrorized the household regularly. By age 13, Štefan began consuming alcohol nearly daily. He frequently engaged in self-destructive behaviors, including cutting his flesh with razors and glass fragments. He used wire to penetrate his abdomen on multiple occasions and inserted heated needles into his genitalia. These extreme acts of self-harm indicated profound psychological disturbance that went unaddressed. During adolescence and young adulthood, Svitek's antisocial behaviors escalated. He began sexually assaulting a woman with developmental disabilities, holding her captive for repeated abuse and torture. She ultimately survived these attacks. He subsequently attacked and attempted to rape a woman in a cemetery in Brezno, using a knife as a weapon. He later expressed that witnessing blood on her face after striking her provided sexual satisfaction. Another person interrupted this assault, causing Svitek to flee. In 1979, after abandoning his education, authorities charged him with multiple offenses: theft, robbery, animal cruelty, and rape. A court sentenced him to imprisonment and mandated alcohol rehabilitation and psychiatric treatment. However, he was released after merely 5 months. Upon release, Svitek appeared to achieve some degree of stability. He secured regular employment, married a woman named Maria, and adopted her daughter from a previous relationship. They had a biological daughter together, and Maria was 6 months pregnant with their second child. However, beneath this facade of domestic normalcy, destructive patterns persisted. Svitek continued drinking heavily and exhibited violence when intoxicated. His wife and children learned to fear his drunken states. October 30th, 1987 marked the night of the murders. Svitek had spent the day drinking at a local establishment in Brezno. He returned home late in the evening to discover his wife and daughters were not present. Knowing his violent tendencies when intoxicated, Maria had taken the children to their summer cabin in the forest. Svitek pursued them through the darkness, branches breaking beneath his footsteps. Upon reaching the cabin and observing interior lighting, he demanded entry. Maria refused, instructing him through the locked door to return home. This denial triggered something catastrophic within him. He located an axe near the woodpile and used it to splinter the door. Once inside, his attack commenced immediately. He struck down his pregnant wife, then decapitated her. Using a knife, he removed her breasts. With a razor blade, he opened her abdomen, removing and scattering her organs. He proceeded to sexually violate her corpse. He then extracted the 6-month-old fetus from her womb and killed it before committing further acts of desecration. He turned his violence toward the children next. Helena, age 6, and Anichka, age 4, were both killed. The violence extended beyond death as he continued assaulting their bodies, driven by what investigators would later describe as a sadistic trance that persisted until dawn. He later informed investigators that this experience provided him with the greatest pleasure he had ever felt, words that disturbed even hardened law enforcement professionals. When morning arrived, he surveyed what he had done. The floor was saturated with blood. The atmosphere was thick and beginning to attract insects. An animal sound from outside, possibly a dog, momentarily penetrated his awareness, and he realized the external world continued functioning. Panic overtook him. He placed the remains of his family members into potato sacks, departed the residence, and disappeared into the forest. For 2 days, he wandered the wilderness. He broke into a cabin seeking shelter and attempted to eat, but found himself unable. Eventually, delirious from his experiences, he made his way to his parents' former home, the location where his father had regularly beaten him. There, he decided he should die. His first attempt involved self-castration, but the knife lacked sufficient sharpness. He tried again using a razor blade but could not complete the action. He then tied a rope to the ceiling and stepped from a chair in an attempted hanging. The rope broke under his weight, sending him crashing to the floor. Blood continued flowing from his genital wounds while his head throbbed with pain. He wandered the streets for several more hours in this condition. When he observed a police vehicle, he did not attempt to flee. Instead, he approached the officers directly, his clothing still stained with blood, and stated quietly, "It was me." When investigators arrived at the summer cabin, even seasoned detectives found the scene overwhelming. One officer vomited outside the structure. Another refused to re-enter after the initial assessment. The lead investigator later stated that the scene resembled less a crime than a ritual from the deepest places of human darkness. Authorities arrested Svitek and transported him to custody. During interrogation, he maintained a calm, almost courteous demeanor. He recounted every detail without displaying emotion. A psychologist who later examined him observed that his narration possessed the rhythm of someone describing a dream. Vivid and structured, yet completely detached from moral considerations. He discussed his childhood experiences, the abuse he suffered, his treatment of animals, his relationships with women, and his drinking. He stated he did not understand why he committed these acts, only that he felt compelled to complete them. The court ordered comprehensive psychiatric evaluation. After extensive testing, experts reached unanimous conclusions. He was diagnosed as a psychopath, not legally insane. His IQ measured at 81, below average but sufficient for him to fully comprehend his actions. Psychiatrists noted his profound sexual sadism and complete absence of empathy. Dr. Lubomir Vyar publicly stated that rehabilitation was impossible in this case. In correspondence from prison, Štefan wrote, "Now they ask me what punishment I deserve. I don't care if it's a rope, prison, or psychiatry. Just let me get rid of my stupid thoughts that haunt me." Yet during courtroom testimony, when describing the night of the murders, he characterized it as the greatest sexual experience of my life. No remorse manifested, No tears appeared, only apparent boredom. On May 30th, 1988, the courtroom in Banska Bystrica fell silent as the judge pronounced the verdict: death by hanging. When these words were spoken, Štefan did not react physically. He attempted to appeal the sentence, but authorities rejected his request. For months he occupied a cell in Bratislava, waiting. Guards reported he spent most days staring at walls, humming to himself as though mentally replaying events repeatedly. At dawn on June 8, 1989, guards entered his cell and informed him the time had arrived. He nodded, stood, and walked with them without speaking. Minutes later, the trapdoor opened, and Štefan Svitek dropped into history as the last person executed in Czechoslovakia. In subsequent years, many attempted to comprehend what he had done. Some argued he was born with inherent evil. Others attributed responsibility to his father, the poverty and the violence that shaped his childhood. In truth, no single factor provides complete explanation. The psychologist who studied him most extensively stated, "He was not mad, nor possessed, nor sick. He was empty. An emptiness, when it learns to love pain, becomes something far worse than madness." These words came from a professional who had spent months examining the hollow expression of someone who felt nothing. Svitek was not delusional. He did not experience auditory hallucinations. He did not kill due to lost control. He killed because, for him, that represented what control felt like. It was his only method of feeling alive. Today, the cottage where these events occurred no longer stands. The forest has reclaimed the location, covering it with moss and silence. Travelers passing through the upper Hron Valley would not realize that beneath the gentle river sounds and rustling birch leaves, there once echoed the screams of a family destroyed by one individual's pathological hunger. Experts who later analyzed his life stated he fit textbook profiles of sexual sadism and psychopathy, diminished empathy, elevated aggression, and compulsive need for domination. However, these clinical terms barely touch the surface. He was a creation, the product of an abusive father, relentless violence, neglect, and unchecked addiction. Every childhood wound left scars that twisted into darker formations. Every humiliation planted seeds of cruelty. By adulthood, his entire identity was constructed around suffering, not avoiding it, but actively seeking it. He represented the convergence of trauma and deviance, the type of person whose internal void becomes a gravitational force pulling toward violence. This makes his case profoundly disturbing. Individuals like Štefan Svitek are not born as fully formed monsters. They are manufactured slowly, quietly, piece by piece, across years of pain, indifference, and silence. His crimes concluded with his execution, but the darkness that shaped him never truly died. It lingers, quiet, patient, concealed in the fractures of human nature, waiting for the next empty soul who learns, as he did, to find pleasure in pain.